Could the UK be headed for war? According to former defence and security chiefs, the army must prepare genuinely for war to credibly deter threats. A report by the new Bletchley Network said a hollowing out of the army over the years must be reversed, with the size of the force already below national critical mass. The government's been criticised for failing to increase defence spending in the spring budget. So how credible is the threat of war? Joining us to discuss this, former senior British Army officer General Sir Richard Barrons, welcome to the programme, and defence analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Let's start with my first guest first and ask you, General Sir Richard Barrons, people will find this frightening, they'll find it worrying, they won't know how seriously to take it, they won't know if this is something being said because, there's a great deal of tub thumping for more investment in defence and it hasn't been forthcoming. How seriously are you taking this idea of a genuine threat of war?
So it's not really me and my peers who are leading this debate. It's been led by people like Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, who in recent weeks have described how the UK now exists in a pre-war world, a world which has returned to the potential for great power confrontation and conflict. And the symptoms of that you see now in Ukraine. And the point of this panel today is to say, well, if we're no longer in the comfortable post-Cold War era, which produced armed forces of a particular type, we're going to have armed forces for this new era, and we probably need to get a move on.
And when you say we probably need to get a move on, you sound restrained, and you sound anything but kind of panicked or urgent or flustered, or as if it's something that's long overdue that we have neglected, that we need to get to immediately in case of some hideously dire consequences. But is that simply your manner of delivery, or do you really feel that it is more urgent than that?
So on the one hand, the Ministry of Defence has a plan to fix the army in the second half of the current decade, and would argue that we've got time to do this and we just need to apply thinking power and money and political leadership. On the other hand, if you look at the events today and you look particularly at Ukraine, with people like President Macron saying we're not going to rule out having to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, and we accept that because of the way things are turning out there is some risk, not a great risk, some risk of Russia breaking through in Ukraine during the course of the summer. And if that sort of thing happens, then I and others will sound a lot more urgent than we might otherwise do.
Let me bring Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford into this discussion. I mean, you and I have discussed this quite a few times on the programme, sir, and I just wonder whether each time the cries for defence to be taken seriously, for the volatile nature of the world at the moment to be taken seriously, fall on deaf ears. And if they do, why they do.
Good afternoon again, Vanessa. Well, I would agree with what Richard has said, is that I don't think that we are in imminent danger of going to war in the extremely near future, but we've got to be prepared for that eventuality later on in the decade. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of owning the timeline. And as I've said before, I think to you, going to war is a come-as-you-are party. Not come as you would like to be, and we have to go with what we've got. Now, I have no doubt that the British Army, of which I was a member, will rise to the occasion. But it's incumbent upon us to make sure that they're best trained and best equipped and have the wherewithal to fight any war that comes their way. And I don't think we're yet in that position, for all the reasons that we've discussed before: lack of spending, appallingly poor defence equipment procurement and sustainment, and so on and so forth. So we've got to be ready. I don't think there's any need to panic at the moment, but perhaps we should be upping the ante slightly.
And Sir Richard, if we continue as we are, if we focus this year on the election and, whatever the ramifications are of that when it's finally held, and we don't take any notice, and the next government doesn't take it any more seriously than the current government, then what?
So if we do nothing, then first of all, we're denying our own government's analysis of the world that we live in, and we're not listening to our friends in NATO about the challenges they think we all face. If we do nothing and we rely on our friends to fill the gap, and the US is making it quite clear that it's going to do less for European security, since Europe is now really quite wealthy. And above all, we rely on our potential enemies, our opponents, to indulge us in not being ready to contest the world with them. And those sorts of hope doesn't really constitute an effective or credible strategy for the safety of the UK.
And so if it is not, Stuart, taken more seriously, if the cries don't provoke or evoke any sort of response at all, and actually this problem, this issue is continually kicked into the long grass, and as it was in the most recent budget, completely ignored as if it doesn't exist at all, then who is going to wake up subsequent governments to the need to take it seriously, and how is this going to happen?
Well, I mean, we're in the ballpark of risk taking. At the moment, the government sees the threats and risks sufficiently low that they can take that risk and not do the full defence spend that we would all like to see. But you know, defence is like car insurance. You have to have it, but you don't necessarily want to use it. I mean, nobody takes their car out and wraps it around a tree because they've paid a year's insurance on it. And like car insurance, you know, you go from fully comprehensive with no excess all the way down to third-party fire and theft. And I think we're very much in the third-party fire and theft region at the moment, heading towards third-party only. And it takes a risk or some awful event happening to waken up the political establishment, who have, in terms of our current politicians, very little personal experience of military service or what going to war means.
And Sir Richard, you know, the situation in terms of recruitment to the army, retention in the army, we all remember, well, maybe only for any of a certain generation, but the extremely creative army recruitment advertising to which we used to be subjected most nights on the television, but we don't see much of that anymore. And we hear that recruitment is a major problem.
So, in fact, applicants for the army right now are at the highest level they've been since April 2015. So, which is good news, and that's possibly because more young people in the country realise that there's a lot more at stake. Retention in the armed forces is a big deal. 8 people leave for every 5 people that join, and that's because they wonder about their purpose, but they're wondering too about their equipment, their training, their accommodation, and to some degree their pay. And there is no fix to defence without cherishing the people, and they are our children who are prepared to stand up and fight for us. And we have a long way to go to restore their sense that they are valued.